Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about everything I read in March, and I read 5 horror novels and 2 point horror novels. And first up was one of those point horror novels, My Secret Admirer by Carol Ellis. And this one is about a teenage girl called Jenny. She and her parents relocate to a new town. And of course the parents all of a sudden need to go back for, I don't know, to take care of some business back at their old home, leaving Jenny alone in a new house in a new town. And she starts to make some friends with some of the local teenagers, and she also starts receiving these voicemails on the answer phone, and it seems she has a secret admirer. She also starts receiving gifts from this admirer, but the gifts get stranger and stranger and quite threatening, and she has to figure out who it is before something bad happens to her. And this one was pretty good. I enjoyed it. It's well written. We are talking, you know, point horror level here. I'm not claiming any literary genius or anything, but it is what it is, and it was a good, enjoyable one. I gave this one 3.5 stars out of 5. It might have been a 4-star, but there was something in the storyline, I won't say exactly what, but it was somewhat similar to another Carol Ellis point horror book, so it kind of didn't have the impact that maybe it should have. It didn't have the same impact that it did when I read the similar thing first time around, so that was a bit of a shame, but it was still really good, and I definitely would have enjoyed it that half a star better, yeah, had that not been the case. But this was a good one, I enjoyed it. And also I want to mention a new podcast that I recently found and have really been enjoying. It's all about point horror books. It's called Don't Point That Horror at Me, and it's hosted by 2 lovely British ladies, and yeah, they are absolutely spot on. They do the perfect mix of snarky when called for, but also you can tell that they have a real genuine love for these books, and I think, yeah, it works really well. It's very funny, really well put together, and yeah, their podcasts have just been an absolute blast. And last month's episode was for My Secret Admirer, so I read the books specifically before listening to the episode. I think their previous episodes I could remember the books enough to enjoy the episode without getting like super spoiled, but this one I didn't remember anything about it, so I thought I would read it before listening to the episode, and yeah, it was excellent. But yeah, I will leave them linked down below, definitely go check them out. Next up I read My Sweet Audrina by V.C Andrews. This was my first V.C Andrews book. I remember seeing the film of Flowers in the Attic when I was quite young, and it was, yeah, brilliant and suitably traumatic, but I've never actually read any of the books, and I'm kind of a bit wary of starting a huge series, so I picked this one in particular because it's not part of a huge series, and the premise sounded really interesting. It's about a 7-year-old girl called Audrina. She lives at home with her parents, her aunt and cousin who is around the same age as her, and she's basically kept a recluse in the house. She isn't allowed to go to school like her cousin is, and her parents are very protective over her. Basically, Audrina had an older sister who died at age 9 before Audrina was born, but the other daughter, the first daughter, was also called Audrina, and so the second Audrina feels completely in the first Audrina's shadow and feels like she's never going to live up to the first and best Audrina. There is a wild cast of characters, a lot of whom would not be politically correct today, but they were all really entertaining to read about. We basically follow Audrina throughout her life now from age 7 as she gets older, and various trials and tribulations she has to go through. Her parents and family are all quite eccentric, and the story, I guess, is more of a gothic horror. There are definitely plenty of dark secrets and family scandals and lots of strange goings on behind closed doors, basically. And for the most part, I did really enjoy this. It's pretty pulpy, trashy. It's, you know, it's quite bonkers and fun, but it is also quite interesting as well, and the story did keep me intrigued for the most part. It did get a little drawn out and bogged down in places, so overall I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up I read Nightlife by Brian Hodge, and this is about a character called Justin who is kind of escaping from his past. He moves to Florida to meet up with a lifelong friend of his and to try and just kind of get his feet back on the ground and start a new life. And coincidentally, at the same time Justin is coming into town, there is a new drug being introduced to the local market called Skull Flush, and it is kind of untested, and it's been given to this one local drug dealer to test out on the market. But the first time it's used at a nightclub, the user turns into a half beast, half man and attacks a bunch of people. And all of that was great. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really interesting premise, and I really just wanted more of the shape-shifting, half animal, half human creatures, and I wanted more of, I guess, the nightclub drug scene in the 90s, and unfortunately that's not really what the book turned out to be. It turns into more of a cat and mouse thriller between Justin and this drug dealer, and while that was good and I definitely enjoyed it from time to time, some of it just kind of felt a bit dragged out, and I was just wanting more shape-shifting, I think, was really what it boiled down to. It actually was pretty few and far between, so that was a shame, but it was still okay, and I did still like his writing enough that I would be interested to read something else by him. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Next I read The Godsend by Bernard Taylor. This is my second novel by him. The other one, Sweetheart, Sweetheart, was one of my favourite reads of last year. If you haven't already heard me talk highly of it, I really loved that one. And this one was really excellent too. Sweetheart, Sweetheart was still my favourite, I will admit, but this one was a really solid 4-star. I buddy read this with the lovely Emily at Page Turns. I will leave her channel linked below, and we both really enjoyed this one. It is about a family, a husband and wife, and they have 3 sons and a daughter, and I won't go into the details, I don't want to spoil the whole setup for you, but basically they have a new baby enter their lives and they take her in as one of their own, and she becomes a part of the family. They name her Bonnie, and she is such a bonny, sweet, cute baby that everyone falls in love with. But over the years, the family is met with tragedy upon tragedy, and it's only after some time that the father of the family begins to suspect Bonnie of being behind it all. This was just an excellently written story. It's not super long and it's very British, and it just is kind of beautifully written. I really like Bernard Taylor's style. He fast became a new favourite of mine, and I'm desperate to read everything else by him. This was really tense. I thought the tension was incredibly well done, and it's balanced out with getting to know this family and just how normal their life is, and then as time goes on, how this affects the family and their relationships. It is super emotional, and I won't spoil the ending, but whew, yeah, it was a good one. Yeah, I really recommend this one. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read my first Ruby Jean Jensen. This is Wait and See, and this was a ton of fun. It is basically like an 80s horror film that you've never seen before. The story is centred around a family who live on a ranch in a small town. The only child that lives there is teenager Charlene, but every summer her cousin Daniel comes to visit. And one summer in the 1950s, Charlene is killed and her body is chained underwater in the local river, and no one found out what happened to her. They all just assumed she ran away. The story then picks up in the present day, the 1980s, and we're following Daniel. He has a family of his own and they are travelling out to this ranch to start a new life there. And I won't go into too much more detail because I don't want to give too much more away, but basically Charlene is released and she is now free to have her revenge. And this was really great. It was thoroughly enjoyable. It was such a page turner, and there were some really awesome scenes where Jensen is describing the skeleton, and I absolutely loved all of that. The story itself was interesting. It definitely went in a couple of directions that I wasn't expecting it to. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I am going to do a separate review video for this, so hopefully I will have that up in a week or 2. Next I read What's Wrong with Valerie by D.A. Fowler, that's Deborah Fowler. And I first heard about this one through Leon at Paperback Mania. He really loved it, and another YouTube friend, Marina, she really enjoyed it too. I will link both of their channels below, do go check them out. They are also huge fans of vintage horror fiction, and this one is about Valerie. She has been taking care of her ailing grandmother for the past few years, and when her grandmother passes away, Valerie inherits the house and money. So Valerie decides she wants to pursue a career in writing, so now that she has this house and money, that gives her the freedom to do that. But the money isn't going to last forever, so she also takes in a lodger to help, you know, earn a bit extra money. Valerie has some really strange dreams, and she is seeing these really creepy monsters. There are these big yellow eyes and these strange sucking noises, and she realises she has to feed the monsters, and who better than her lodger, who, you know, nobody's going to miss, and things go from there. This is really unique. I absolutely loved her writing style. It really hooked me in from the first page. It's very dark humour, but humorous nonetheless, and Valerie is just such a wonderful character to read about because she is completely unhinged, but we don't know whether she's unhinged because of these things she's experiencing or if they are just all in her head. Yeah, this one was also thoroughly enjoyable. It was a wild ride. Every time you thought Valerie had gone too far, she manages to go even further. It was a lot of fun, really enjoyed it. There is a sequel which I would really like to track down and read, but her novels are pretty hard to find, so they are a bit pricey. But I'm definitely going to keep an eye out, and yeah, this one was great. I gave it 4 stars. And then I finished the month off with another point horror book. This was The Diary by Sinclair Smith, and this is about a character called Delia. She finds an old diary in her locker at school, and she becomes really obsessed with reading it and finding out about this girl who had written in the diary some years ago, and she starts to adopt some of this girl's behaviours. Delia is quite a good girl, you know, she pays attention at school, she gets good grades, but the girl she reads about in the diary is a bit more reckless, and her life seems to be much more exciting than Delia's. And the more she reads about this girl, the more she believes that they're actually the same person, and that the girl that wrote the diary was actually Delia herself in a past life. Not only that, but this girl from the diary was murdered, and Delia must find out who the killer is before the same thing happens again. And this was good. I did enjoy it. I gave it 3 stars. It, yeah, definitely wasn't my favourite point horror book, but definitely not my least favourite either, so it was just kind of in the middle. It was enjoyable while it lasted, but it wasn't anything too memorable, I guess, but it was a fun one. It was a quick read and I enjoyed it for what it was. So that was everything I read in March. I had a pretty decent month. Let me know if you read any of these, tell me what you thought, or let me know if you've read anything good recently. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!